The Tiger tank needs no special introduction. It is one of the most famous tanks of World War II. It gained its fame primarily through its combat effectiveness. With substantial armor for its time, 100 mm front and 80 mm side, and armed with the powerful 8.8 cm KWK-36 gun, the Tiger tank was a serious and extremely dangerous opponent. Until the very end of hostilities, it was capable of destroying most Soviet and Allied tanks from distances that ensured its safety from return fire. According to German data, for every Tiger tank destroyed in battle, there were 10 or even 12 enemy tanks lost. This result is truly impressive, and thanks to the efforts of historians, an aura of invincibility formed around it. At first glance, it might seem that after numerous attempts to create wunderwaffe, the Germans finally managed to create an absolute weapon, dominating the battlefield and capable of turning the tide of war in the most critical situations. Heavy tank battalions were formed from Tigers, intended for breaking through enemy defenses or for eliminating dangerous enemy breakthroughs. These monsters, crushing everything in their path, were considered almost invulnerable, and their numbers, with increased production, were only supposed to grow. However, according to German data, only 1,354 Tiger tanks were manufactured in total, and by the spring of 1945, no more than 150 Tigers remained. Where did the rest go? And why, despite all the efforts of the Third Reich's industry, over those 2 years, only about 12.5 heavy tank battalions with a standard strength of 45 vehicles could be formed? The fact is that Tiger losses were quite comparable to their production volumes. The dry statistics tell this story. In 1943, at the peak of its combat use, 291 tanks were irrecoverably lost, while only 647 tanks were produced that entire year. In 1944, production volumes increased by 1.5 times, from 54 to 79 tanks per month on average, but losses also grew. In the first half of the year, 475 tanks were assembled, with 316 irrecoverably lost. In July and August, another 70 vehicles were produced, which turned out to be the last. Henschel finally switched to producing the Tiger II, which had the highest priority. And this was while, by the end of the year, irrecoverable losses had grown to 790 vehicles, leaving no more than 300 of them on both fronts combined. To this, one must add a rather complex and convoluted methodology for statistical accounting. Only completely destroyed vehicles, or those left on the battlefield and captured by the enemy, were classified as irrecoverable losses. The rest were listed as requiring major repair and could be written off several months later for technical reasons. So the actual loss figures were much higher. It's clear that in such a situation, forming new heavy tank battalions was very difficult. The main part of new machines went to replenish losses. Most already formed battalions completely renewed their material 3 or 4 times over. Of course, like any tank, the Tiger had its advantages and disadvantages. The success of its combat use often depended on a number of circumstances, which were frequently unrelated to design flaws or the concept behind its creation. So, what factors can explain such a massive die-off of the most powerful and well-protected German big cats? And what were the main causes of death for German tank crews? If we look at the loss statistics for heavy tank battalions, a rather interesting picture emerges. Only 45% of the vehicles were destroyed directly in battle. 41% were blown up by their own crews, and another 14% were lost for other reasons. Thus, more than half of the lost Tigers are classified as non-combat losses. This high percentage is often explained by the Tiger's low reliability and the difficulties associated with their repair. This is only partly true. Indeed, even replacing road wheels in field conditions became a nightmare for repair crews, and replacing the transmission required disassembling half the tank, starting with removing the 11-ton turret. However, German tankers had no major complaints about the Tiger's reliability. With proper maintenance and operation, it broke down quite rarely. The main cause should still be considered its excessive weight of 57 tons. This seriously complicated and sometimes made the timely evacuation of damaged vehicles impossible. In the final stages of the war, even perfectly functional vehicles often had to be blown up. The Tiger had an extremely short range, just over 100 kilometers, and was incredibly fuel-hungry, consuming up to 10 liters per kilometer. A significant number were abandoned due to a lack of fuel. Furthermore, there were serious problems with crossing water obstacles, as most bridges simply couldn't support it. Evacuation by rail was complicated by the fact that the Tiger's width exceeded the standard railway loading gauge. Before being loaded onto a flat car, the tank had to be reshod with narrow transport tracks, a labor-intensive and time-consuming process. Often, there simply wasn't enough time for this. Now let's talk about combat losses, for it was in these that the overwhelming majority of German tankers perished. Despite its high level of protection, the Tiger was not absolutely invulnerable. Its full-scale debut, where it maximally demonstrated its outstanding characteristics, is considered to be the Battle of Kharkov in February-March 1943. The 36 Tigers deployed there played one of the key roles, and their contribution to the German victory was decisive. At the same time, only 3 Tigers were lost. However, the initial shock quickly wore off, and the Red Army began looking for ways to combat them. The first recommendations for infantry anti-tank gun crews and tank crews appeared as early as May. Apparently, they were not useless. Unfortunately, there are no statistics on Tiger losses by different damaging factors. Nevertheless, the main causes can be identified, and their nature changed depending on the period. In the initial stage, the absolute majority of Tigers were disabled by mine explosions. Anti-tank artillery and tanks could only knock them out with flanking fire into their less protected sides, acting predominantly from ambushes. To some extent, during this period, the Tigers became victims of their own propaganda. Goebbels' ministry so extolled its combat qualities that the Wehrmacht command threw Tiger companies into battle without artillery support or infantry escort, without covering their flanks with medium tanks. Often, its real combat capabilities were not considered. Tigers were thrown into assaults on unsuppressed anti-tank defenses, on terrain unfavorable for them, without reconnaissance or mine clearing. By early 1944, the Red Army was conducting offensive operations, and the role of mines significantly decreased. However, the Tigers also lost their absolute technical superiority. Tanks like the T-34-85 and IS-2 appeared, as well as self-propelled guns like the Su-85 and Su-100, capable of penetrating its front armor from a kilometer away. The Beast Hunters, the Su-152 and ISU-152, were deadly to it. Heavy artillery and aviation were increasingly used to destroy Tigers. The Allies particularly excelled in this. Almost 2/3 of Tigers on the Western Front were destroyed by air strikes. Overall, the Tigers repeatedly confirmed their reputation as an extremely dangerous opponent, especially for tanks, among which they had almost no equals. Tankers feared them even more than the born and clearly specialized tank destroyers, the Panthers. They played an important role in a number of battles and achieved local success with correct tactical application, but nothing more. They did not become a miracle weapon capable of changing the course of the war. And not because there were too few of them. Despite all their merits, this formidable machine could be not only stopped but also destroyed through the competent interaction of different military branches. What's your take? Do you think the Tiger's legendary status is justified by its combat record? Or was its reputation more a product of myth and propaganda? Share your thoughts in the comments below.